G'day everyone. Righto, settle in, 'cause you're not gonna believe this yarn. It's a cracker of a story about a bloke who had it all, and the Sheila who waited patiently for the perfect moment to take it all back. Remember to subscribe to the channel, give this video a massive thumbs up, and whack a comment down below with your thoughts. You don't want to miss a beat. The sound that made the silence in courtroom 4B of the Sydney District Court so absolute, you could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights wasn't the judge's gavel or the rustle of papers. It was a soft, defiant pop of a cork. Rick the Duke O'Connell, a bloke carved from pure arrogance and the finest wool of his bespoke suit, stood up with a triumphant smile, his arm wrapped around a woman who most definitely wasn't his missus. With a flourish fit for a king, he uncorked a bottle of premium Aussie sparkling and poured 2 glasses, his lover, Saskia Lane, giggling beside him. He was here to finalize the divorce, to shake his 20-year wife off his back like a minor inconvenience. But Rick never got to taste his bubbles, because what came next wasn't a settlement, it was an annihilation. Rick O'Connell didn't just enter a room, he conquered it. That Thursday morning, he strode into the hushed, wood-paneled corridors of the courthouse like he was stepping onto the deck of his super yacht on Sydney Harbor. He was a monument to his own success, from the polished gleam of his Italian leather loafers to the cocksure set of his jaw. His suit, the color of a coming storm, was a stark contrast to the almost offensively cheerful disposition he wore like a medal. On his arm was Saskia Lane, 28 years old, a full 2 decades younger than the woman she was helping to replace. Saskia was all sharp angles and modern beauty, a living testament to Rick's virility and wealth. Her dress was a fine crimson silk that clung to a figure sculpted by personal trainers and a carefree lifestyle. She looked at Rick with that doe-eyed adoration only a man with a 9-figure net worth could inspire. To the reporters and legal assistants clustered in the hallway, they weren't just a couple. They were a statement. A billboard for a midlife crisis so epic it deserved its own reality TV series. But the real showstopper, the act of hubris that would be talked about for years, was what his assistant was carrying. A silver ice bucket, from which the neck of a bottle of bubbly protruded. It was a theatrical act of contempt so profound it stole the air from the hallway. They weren't there for a legal proceeding. They were there for a coronation. Rick was celebrating the final nail in the coffin of his marriage. Across the courtroom, almost invisible in her quiet dignity, sat Isabel O'Connell. At 49, she wasn't the haggard, broken woman everyone expected to see. There was no trace of the hysterical wife, no sign of the spurned victim. She wore a simple navy blue dress. Her blonde hair, with threads of silver, was pulled back in an elegant bun. Her hands, unadorned, save for the wedding ring she hadn't yet removed, were calmly folded in her lap. She sat with her lawyer, Eliza Jones, a woman whose stillness masked a mind as sharp as a steel trap. Isabel watched Rick's entrance not with tears, but with a strange, unsettling serenity. She saw the bubbly, saw Saskia's triumphant smile, and felt a wave not of pain, but of pity. He still didn't get it. After all this time, after everything she had done, everything they had built, he still saw her as nothing more than a household accessory he was now discarding. The room filled up. Rick and Saskia took their seats at the petitioner's table. His lawyer, a burly, equally smug bloke named Carl Simpson, arranged his files with a flourish. Simpson gave a curt nod to Eliza Jones, a gesture dripping with condescension. He saw this as an open and shut case, a high-asset divorce where the non-earning spouse got a generous but strictly limited payout. He'd handled dozens of them. The blokes always won. The court officer's voice boomed. "All rise." Judge Helen Peters entered. She was a woman in her late 60s, with a reputation for not suffering fools. Her piercing eyes scanned the room, pausing for a split second on the ice bucket at Rick O'Connell's feet. A flash of something unreadable, amusement, annoyance, crossed her face before she sat on the bench, her expression settling into an impassive mask of judicial authority. "Be seated," she ordered. Rick leaned over to Saskia and whispered, his voice just loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Get ready to toast your new life, love." He gave her a wink. Isabel closed her eyes for a single, long second. She wasn't praying. She was remembering the beginning. Before the marble and the glass towers, before the contempt and the bubbly. She was remembering a tiny apartment that always smelled of paint thinner and ambition, and the man who once promised her the world, not imagining that one day she'd be the legal owner of it. 25 years ago, Rick O'Connell wasn't a titan of industry. He was a bloke with limitless energy, a charming grin, and holes in his socks. He was a tradie with a ute and a dream, struggling to get his little construction business off the ground. He met Isabel Duran at a local Bunnings. She wasn't a socialite. She was an architecture history student with a passion for design and a sharp eye for potential. He was buying plasterboard. She was sketching the trusses of an old heritage building across the street. He fell instantly for her quiet intelligence and the way she saw the world, not just for what it was, but for what it could be. Their courtship was a whirlwind of late-night talks, fueled by cheap coffee over blueprints on their tiny kitchen table. He had the brawn and the salesmanship. She had the vision. "People don't just buy a house, Rick," she told him one night, tapping a pencil on a plan. "They buy a feeling. They buy a story of the life they want to live." It was Isabel who convinced him to stop building cookie-cutter houses and start creating homes. It was Isabel who, using her grandmother's inheritance, a modest but crucial $50,000, provided the seed money for them to buy their first run-down Victorian terrace in a neighborhood no one wanted. Rick saw a dump. Isabel saw good bones and a future. While he handled the construction crews, she handled the soul of the project. She spent weeks researching the home's original history, sourcing era-appropriate fittings, designing a floor plan that was both functionally modern and historically respectful. She wasn't just decorating. She was creating the very product he was selling. When it was finished, it sold in a single day for 3 times their investment. Their company was born. O'Connell Properties, Rick wanted to call it. "Nah," Isabel had said firmly, a rare moment of assertiveness in those early days. "It should be O'Connell and Duran Properties. We're partners in this. Your name and my name together." Rick, still head over heels in love and acknowledging the truth in her words, had happily agreed. The name was registered, and the partnership legally formed, with both listed as founding partners. That crucial detail, signed in a document in a registry office, was a promise etched in ink. The next 10 years were a blur of success. O'Connell and Duran Properties became the top name in luxury restorations and high-end developments. Isabel's design philosophy, a mix of classic elegance and comfortable living, became their signature. She was the silent force behind the brand. While Rick was the face, the one in the magazines shaking hands with mayors and financiers, Isabel was the one staging the properties, curating the art, arranging the intimate dinner parties where hesitant investors were persuaded to sign multi-million-dollar checks. She cultivated the relationships that Rick then leveraged for his deals. She curated his social life with the same meticulous care she used to design a living room, understanding that in their world, perception was currency. But success changed Rick. The man who once valued her vision began to belittle it. Her work became her little hobbies. The investor dinners she orchestrated were just parties. The 50 grand of her family's seed money was forgotten, rewritten in his mind as a small loan he'd dwarfed with his own genius. He began to believe his own press. He wasn't part of a team. He was a lone artist, a king, and Isabel was simply a part of his court. The first affair was with an architect 10 years younger than him. Isabel found out through a hotel bill carelessly left in a suit pocket. When she confronted him, her heart in pieces, he didn't deny it. He apologized not for the betrayal, but for getting caught. He called it a stupid mistake, a meaningless flirtation, brought on by stress. He promised it would never happen again. Isabel, still believing in the man she had married and the life they had built, chose to forgive him. By then they had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and she wanted to preserve their family. But something essential had broken. The trust that had been the foundation of their partnership, both personal and professional, was gone. A few years later, a different kind of threat emerged. A rival developer launched a frivolous but potentially damaging lawsuit against O'Connell and Duran Properties. Their lawyer at the time, a nervous old fella named Robles, panicked. He advised Rick that, to protect his core assets from a potential judgment, he should transfer his majority stake in the company to Isabel. Her name isn't on the building permits. Her public profile is purely social. She's clean, Robles argued. It's a temporary measure. We'll put everything in her name. A simple asset assignment. Once this blows over, she signs it back. It's foolproof. Rick loved the idea. He felt so bloody clever. He presented it to Isabel as a brilliant legal strategy to protect their family's legacy. He made her feel like his trusted confidant, his partner in this clandestine maneuver. "I need you, Izzy," he'd said, his voice full of the same heartfelt charm he'd used in his Bunnings days. "You're the only one I can trust to hold this for me." Isabel, wanting to believe he still saw her as his partner, agreed. She went to the lawyer's office alone. Rick was too busy closing a deal in Brisbane, and she signed the document. The post-nuptial asset assignment agreement. It felt cold and clinical. She signed where the lawyer told her to, her mind on protecting her children's future. She never received a final executed copy. Rick told her it was filed away, a formality that was all handled. The lawsuit was eventually dropped, and life went on. Rick never asked Isabel to sign the assets back. He never mentioned the agreement again. Why would he? In his mind, it was all his anyway. The piece of paper was a formality. He was the king, and she was just the vault keeper. He forgot about the document, just as he had forgotten about her initial investment, her design genius, and her name etched beside his on the company's founding papers. He forgot that a promise once written into law has a life of its own, and in his forgetfulness, he had handed her the keys to the entire kingdom. Back in the present, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Judge Peters adjusted her glasses and looked at the 2 tables. "Mr. Simpson, you may proceed." Carl Simpson rose to his feet, a beefy man in his 50s. He clasped his hands behind his back and walked slowly before the judge. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "This is, in essence, a simple matter. We are here today to dissolve the marriage of Rick and Isabel O'Connell. While this is always a sad occasion, my client, Mr. O'Connell, is prepared to be more than fair. He is a man who honors his commitments." He paused, letting the irony of his statement hang in the air, though he himself was oblivious to it. Mr. O'Connell built a property empire, O'Connell and Duran Properties, from the ground up, through his own sweat, his own genius, and his own considerable risk. Mrs. O'Connell, for her part, was a dedicated wife and an excellent mother. She created a comfortable home and supported him socially, as was her role. For this, Mr. O'Connell is deeply grateful. Isabel sat motionless, her expression unreadable. Beside her, Eliza Jones made a small note on a legal pad. Simpson continued, his voice swelling with magnanimity. Therefore, my client is offering a settlement that can only be described as exceptionally generous. A one-off payment of $10 million tax-free, the deed to the Vaucluse mansion, paid in full, and a spousal support payment of $50,000 per month for the next 10 years. Your Honor, this is a package that will allow Mrs. O'Connell to continue living in extreme comfort for the rest of her life, without having to work a single day. He turned slightly to face Isabel's table, a condescending smirk on his lips. It's a generous offer, a final gift in recognition of their years together. We believe it is more than equitable, and we hope the court will see it that way, allowing us to conclude this matter swiftly. He sat down, an expression of immense self-satisfaction on his face. Rick leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs and giving Saskia's hand a confident squeeze. $10 million, to him, was a rounding error. The cost of an annoyance, a small price to pay for his freedom, and the entirety of the billion-dollar empire he considered his alone. Judge Peters looked to Isabel's table. Ms. Jones? Eliza Jones rose to her feet. She was the physical opposite of Carl Simpson. Where he was broad and loud, she was slender and serene. She didn't pace. She stood perfectly still, her presence commanding the room through her sheer focus. $10 million, Your Honor, Eliza began, her voice clear and precise. We thank Mr. Simpson for his performance. However, we are not here today to negotiate a settlement for Mrs. O'Connell. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Simpson's grin tightened. Mr. Simpson paints a picture of a benevolent king bestowing riches upon a loyal subject. This picture is a fantasy, Eliza continued. It is a narrative constructed to erase my client's fundamental role, not just in the marriage, but in the very creation and ownership of the assets in question. We are not here to divide matrimonial assets, Your Honor. We are here to confirm legal ownership. The murmur grew louder. Rick uncrossed his legs. A flash of irritation crossed his face. What was this rubbish? My client, Isabel Duran, is not seeking a handout from her husband, Eliza said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. She is not the non-earning spouse Mr. Simpson so dismissively described. The evidence will show that Mrs. Duran was the founding partner of O'Connell and Duran Properties. Her financial investment was the seed from which it grew. Her creative vision was the product it sold. And most importantly, as we will prove with legally binding and fully executed documents, she is, and has been for several years, the majority and controlling owner of the entire corporate structure of O'Connell and Duran. The courtroom fell into a stunned and absolute silence. Carl Simpson shot to his feet. Objection! Your Honor, this is absurd. It's a desperate, fanciful claim. Rick stared at Eliza Jones, as if she'd just started speaking in tongues. He let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. Controlling owner? She's nuts, he muttered to Saskia, who was now looking from Rick to Isabel with a growing sense of confusion. Judge Peters raised a hand. Mr. Simpson, sit down. Your objection is noted, but this is an opening statement, not testimony. She looked at Eliza. Ms. Jones, you're making an extraordinary claim. I trust you have more than just rhetoric to back it up. Eliza Jones gave a small, confident smile. Yes, Your Honor, we have documents, we have witnesses, and we have the truth. Mr. O'Connell, in his arrogance, appears to have forgotten the fine print of his own history. We are simply here today to remind him. She sat down. Isabel looked straight ahead, her gaze meeting Rick's across the room. For the first time that day, The smug confidence in his eyes was replaced with a sliver of something else, a tiny crack in the marble facade. It was a look of confusion, mixed with a budding rage. He had come for a victory lap, but his opponent hadn't even bothered to show up for the same race. She was running a completely different one, and he had the sickening feeling she was already at the finish line. "Ms. Jones, you may call your first witness," Judge Peters said, her voice cutting through the tension of the opening statements. "The petitioner has no witnesses, Your Honor," Eliza replied calmly. "We believe the evidence speaks for itself. We'd like to begin by submitting our first piece of evidence. Evidence A." An assistant placed the folder of documents on the clerk's desk, who then handed it to the judge. Copies were distributed to Judge Peters and a bewildered Carl Simpson. "This document, Your Honor," Eliza explained, "is a certified copy of the original Articles of Incorporation for a company called O'Connell and Duran Properties Pty Limited, filed with the Australian Securities and Investments Commission 24 years ago." Rick squinted at the document Simpson slid over to him. He remembered the name, of course. It was a sentimental choice from a past life. It meant nothing. "As the court can see," Eliza continued, "there are two founding partners listed with equal shares, Rick O'Connell and Isabel Duran. Not Isabel O'Connell, the wife, but Isabel Duran, the person. Her maiden name." Simpson stood up, shaking his head. "Your Honor, this is a historical document. It reflects the state of the company 2 decades ago. It means nothing now. O'Connell and Duran Properties has undergone numerous restructures, mergers, and the creation of a dozen subsidiaries and a principal holding company. This ancient artifact has no bearing on the current corporate structure." Eliza waited for him to finish. "On the contrary, Your Honor, the foundation is everything. This document establishes from day one that this was not Mr. O'Connell's solo venture. It was a partnership. But Mr. Simpson is correct that this is only the start of the story. Let us move to the seed money that financed this partnership." She turned her attention to Rick. "Mr. O'Connell, in your deposition, you claimed that you started your company with your own savings and a small loan from your father. Is that correct?" Rick leaned into the microphone. "That's right. 100%. I built it on my own." "Are you certain you received no significant financial assistance from anyone else, specifically from Isabel or her family?" "Absolutely not," Rick said with a dismissive wave. "Her family didn't have that kind of money. It was all me. All me." "I see," Eliza said softly. "Then perhaps you can explain evidence B." Another document was displayed. This one was older, the paper yellowed with age. It was a handwritten letter. "This," Eliza announced, "is a letter from Isabel's late father, Mr. David Duran, to his bank, dated April 12, 1999. We have authenticated the signature. In it, he authorizes a bank check to be issued from his retirement account in the amount of $50,000. Simpson was on his feet again. "Objection! Hearsay and irrelevant. A letter from a deceased man to his bank doesn't prove where that money went." "Patience, Mr. Simpson," Judge Peters warned, her eyes fixed on the document. "The letter goes on to say," Eliza read, and I quote, "This check is to be made payable to both Rick O'Connell and Isabel Duran to serve as the initial capital investment for their new joint business venture. And, Your Honor, attached to this letter is a copy of that same bank check obtained from the bank's records. It is endorsed on the back by 2 signatures, Rick O'Connell and Isabel Duran, and it was deposited into the first corporate account of O'Connell and Duran Properties." The courtroom was dead silent. All eyes were on Rick. His face, moments ago so confident, was now reddening with a deep rage. He had gotten so used to telling his rags-to-riches story for so long, he had come to believe the fiction. This piece of paper was a ghost from a past he had deliberately buried. "It was a gift!" Rick blurted out, his voice too loud. David gave us that money as a wedding present. Eliza raised an eyebrow. A wedding present, Mr. O'Connell? You were married 3 years before this check was issued. Furthermore, Mr. Duran's letter explicitly calls it a capital investment for a joint business venture. That doesn't sound like a gift. It sounds like a business transaction. A transaction, I might add, for which we can find no record of repayment. The first crack in Rick's marble facade had appeared. He was a liar. He had lied under oath in his deposition and had just been caught out. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was a significant one. It damaged his credibility. It planted a seed of doubt. Carl Simpson scrambled for damage control. Your Honor, my client clearly misremembered the details of an event from a quarter-century ago. This is a petty attempt to muddy the waters. $50,000, even if it was a loan, is a pittance compared to the billion-dollar valuation of the company today. It's a rounding error. Is a foundation a rounding error, Mr. Simpson? Eliza countered softly. Or is it the most crucial part of any structure? That $50,000 invested into the property designed by my client yielded a 300% return in less than 6 months. That profit, not Mr. O'Connell's savings, is what truly funded the company's expansion. The entire empire is built on that foundation. A foundation of my client's money and my client's vision. Judge Peters looked from the check to Rick's furious face. She said nothing, but her expression was stern. The narrative was shifting. Isabel Duran was no longer a simple housewife looking for a handout. She was a founding partner whose initial contribution had just been proven, and whose ex-husband had just lied about it in open court. Rick felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He glanced at Saskia. The adoration in her eyes was now mixed with a hint of confusion and concern. This wasn't the quick, clean execution he'd promised her. This was getting messy. For the first time, he felt a twinge of unease. He had underestimated Isabel, or more accurately, he had forgotten who she was. And he was beginning to suspect her lawyer, this Biwa, understated woman, had a whole lot more to say. Eliza Jones let the impact of the first revelation settle before continuing, her method deliberate and devastatingly effective. She wasn't attacking with a sledgehammer. She was dismantling Rick's fortress brick by brick. Now that we've established the financial foundation of O'Connell and Duran Properties, she said, addressing the judge, let's move to its creative foundation. Mr. O'Connell has consistently presented himself as the singular visionary behind the company's success. She gestured to a large screen that had been set up in the courtroom. We'd like to submit Evidence C. This is a collection of magazine articles, architectural awards, and marketing materials from the last 20 years. Images began to appear on the screen. Pages from design and business magazines, photos of gleaming glass and steel homes, restored terraces, and luxurious apartments. In every photo with a person was Rick. Rick in a hard hat on a construction site. Rick in a boardroom pointing at a model. Rick accepting an award. As you can see, Eliza said, the public narrative has been carefully curated. Mr. O'Connell is the face and the name of the brand. Carl Simpson smiled. Ms. Jones is proving my point. The evidence of my client's success is overwhelming. I'm not finished, Eliza said coolly. Now let's look at the actual work. We call our next witness, Mr. Frank Hernandez, an older gentleman in his 70s, with kind eyes and work-worn hands, made his way to the witness stand. Mr. Hernandez, Eliza began, would you please state your occupation for the court? I was a project manager, he said in a clear, steady voice. I worked for O'Connell and Duran for 18 years, right from the start. I was their third employee. Thank you. Mr. Hernandez, you oversaw the construction of more than 50 properties for the company. In your professional experience, who was responsible for the core design concepts, the aesthetic selections, the material choices, and the final staging that made those properties so desirable. Simpson rose to his feet. Objection. Calls for speculation. Overruled, Judge Peters snapped. The witness is being asked to bind about his direct professional experience. You may answer. Hernandez looked directly at the judge. In the early days, it was all Mrs. O'Connell. Isabel, she had the eye. Rick was great at getting the permits and handling the subcontractors. But Isabel was the one who made the places special. She'd find some old fireplace around at a salvage yard, or sketch a new kitchen layout on a napkin that was just perfect. She picked every paint color, every tile, every light fixture. We didn't call it staging back then, but she was the one who furnished the first display homes using pieces from her own house. That's what sold them. Eliza nodded. And as the company grew, did her role diminish? Not at all, Hernandez said. It just got bigger. She hired and managed the whole interior design team. Nothing was ordered. No floor plan was finalized without her sign-off on the aesthetic side of things. Rick handled the money and the schedule. But Isabel created the product. Everyone on the inside knew it. She was the soul of the company. Eliza let his words sink in before asking her last question. Mr. Hernandez, why are you no longer with the company? The old man's face saddened. Mr. O'Connell laid me off 2 years ago. Said they were streamlining, and my pension was too expensive. I'd worked for him for 18 years. Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. No further questions. Simpson declined to cross-examine, knowing Hernandez was a sympathetic, credible witness who would only do more damage. Next, Eliza called a catering supplier who testified about the dozens of investor events Isabel had hosted, providing menus and guest lists that corresponded with major financing deals. Then she called a former junior designer who tearfully recounted how Isabel had mentored him and how his own designs were often presented to Rick by a senior designer who took the credit. The picture was becoming painfully clear. Isabel wasn't a housewife who threw parties. She was an uncredited executive, the chief creative officer of O'Connell and Duran Properties, whose contributions had been systematically erased from the official history. Rick was furious. He felt his power, his very identity, was being publicly dissected and relabeled. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about his legacy. Then, Eliza Jones returned to her table and picked up a single sheet of paper. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence regarding the fundamental identity of this company, she announced. It's something so obvious it's been hidden in plain sight for 24 years. She held up the paper. It was a close-up of the O'Connell and Duran Properties logo. O'Connell and Duran, she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. We've established that O'Connell is for Rick. O'Connell and Duran is for Isabel's maiden name. Mr. O'Connell, in his public interviews, has often been asked about the name. He has claimed that Duran was chosen because it denotes durability, or because it sounds enduring and elegant. A clever branding strategy. She paused, looking directly at Rick. But we believe there's more to it. We believe the name itself is a contract, a promise of partnership, a truth that Mr. O'Connell has spent the last decade trying to forget. She placed the paper down. But our most compelling evidence has yet to be submitted, and it goes far beyond the company's name or history. It concerns its current legal ownership, a matter which Mr. O'Connell himself arranged. Carl Simpson gave a nervous, forced laugh. Ownership, Your Honor? This is getting more ridiculous by the minute. Ownership of the FDP Holding Corporation is held in a series of complex trusts designed by the best financial minds in the country. My client, Mr. O'Connell, is the sole beneficiary. It's unassailable. Is it, Mr. Simpson? Eliza asked, a gleam in her eyes. Because we have a document signed by your client that says otherwise. Rick's blood ran cold. The lawsuit. The clever lawyer. Robles. The document he'd had Isabel sign to protect the family. He had a vague, nauseating recollection of it. He'd seen it as a clever trick, a temporary shell game. It had never occurred to him to reverse it. Why would it? He was in charge. She was his wife. It was all his anyway. The sickening knot in his stomach tightened into a ball of ice. He looked at Isabel. Her serene expression hadn't changed, but now he saw it for what it was. It wasn't calmness. It was certainty. "Ms. Jones, what document are you referring to?" Judge Peters asked, her voice tinged with an impatient curiosity. The courtroom was as still as a tomb. "We'd like to submit into evidence. Evidence F, Your Honor," Eliza said. "It is titled Post-Nuptial Asset Assignment Agreement, dated May 14th, 7 years ago." Carl Simpson went pale. He shot a frantic glance at Rick, who felt a jolt of pure adrenaline, the kind that precedes a car crash. He knew the document. He had orchestrated its creation, but he hadn't looked at it in years. He had forgotten the details, trusting its purpose to temporarily protect him. The clerk handed the document to Judge Peters, and a copy to Simpson's table. Simpson snatched it, his eyes scanning the dense legal text with mounting horror. "Your Honor," Eliza began to explain. 7 years ago, O'Connell and Duran Properties faced a significant, though ultimately unsubstantiated, lawsuit. On the advice of his then attorney, Mr. O'Connell decided to legally insulate his assets. The solution he chose was to transfer his majority interest in the principal holding company, the entity that owns all the subsidiaries, every property, every dollar to his wife's name. A wave of gasps spread through the gallery. Saskia's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. Simpson found his voice, sputtering. "A temporary transfer, a common asset protection strategy." "The law, Mr. Simpson," Eliza countered, her voice dangerously soft, "doesn't care about vague understandings. It cares about what is written and what is signed. Please direct your attention to page 4, section 3, subsection B." Simpson's fingers fumbled with the pages. Judge Peters was already there, her finger tracing the lines of the text. "The clause," Eliza said, her words like hammer blows, "stipulates the conditions under which the assets would revert to Mr. O'Connell. It states that ownership will be transferred back upon a joint written request submitted to the corporate trustee by both parties, Mr. Rick O'Connell and Mrs. Isabel Duran." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Your Honor, we have submitted an affidavit from the trustee, confirming that no such joint request was ever made or even attempted." Rick's mind was racing, trying to find a way out of the trap. "She was supposed to sign it back," he rasped to Simpson. "Did you ever present a document to her to sign to return the assets, Mr. O'Connell?" Eliza asked, as if she could hear his thoughts. Rick was cornered. He hadn't. Once the lawsuit faded, he was consumed by a new mega-project in Brisbane. The document, the transfer, it all slipped his mind. An administrative detail. He was the king. Paperwork was for peasants. He never imagined his queen, the quiet, subservient woman, would ever think to use the power he had so carelessly handed her. O'Connell, sweating profusely, tried another angle. "Your Honor, this document was clearly signed under duress, the duress of a lawsuit, and was presented to Mrs. O'Connell by my client's lawyer. She had no independent legal advice. The agreement is unconscionable and should be voided." It was a good legal argument, a standard one. Eliza Jones was ready for it. "Unconscionable, Mr. Simpson?" she asked. "My client was told by her husband that he was acting to protect their family's legacy. He told her he was placing his ultimate trust in her. He framed it as an act of partnership. She signed voluntarily, believing she was helping her husband and securing her children's future. Then she delivered the final, crushing blow. Furthermore," Eliza continued, "Mr. O'Connell wasn't the only one with legal advice. Your Honor, we would like to present Evidence G, another document. This one was a single page. It was a letter. This is a letter from Isabel O'Connell to her husband, dated 1 week after she signed the asset transfer. It was sent via certified mail, and we have the receipt here. I will read the relevant paragraph. She cleared her throat. Rick, I have signed the papers as you asked. I trust that you know what is best for our family's security. My one condition, as we discussed, is that this transfer be permanent. You have always said that everything you build is for the kids and me. This document now makes that promise a legal reality. It is my and their security in case anything ever happens to you or us. I consider this matter resolved, and company ownership now formally rests with me, per the agreement we both signed. Rick gaped. He had never seen that letter. Never. Wait. Certified mail. His assistant, Sarah, must have signed for it, or Beipor, whom he'd sacked 6 months ago after she'd messed up his lunch reservation. He had a vague memory of her handing him a stack of mail, official-looking envelopes he'd told her to just file away. He never read them. He had more important things to do. Your Honor, Eliza concluded, her voice ringing with finality. Mr. O'Connell received this letter. He never challenged it. He never replied. He never took any action to reverse the transfer. By his own inaction and silence, he legally accepted its terms. He was so certain of his control over his wife that he ignored a legally binding declaration that stripped him of his entire fortune. He didn't forget it. He simply didn't care. He believed that documents, laws, the very promises he made, didn't apply to him. She turned and looked at Rick O'Connell, her eyes filled with a cold, clear fire. He was wrong. Rick slumped in his chair, his face the color of ash. He shuffled his papers, but it was a useless gesture. He was a general whose army had turned out to be a parade of cardboard cutouts. Rick O'Connell no longer looked at his lawyer, or the judge, or even Isabel. He was staring into a void, at the ghost of his own monumental arrogance. He had built an empire, but he had been too proud to read the deed. He had set a trap to protect himself, and then, in his hubris, he had walked right into it, pulled the rope, and latched the cage door from the inside. And standing outside that cage, holding the only key, was the woman he had tried to discard like yesterday's news. What do you reckon about Isabel's strategy? Do you think her patience and cunning were the keys to her victory? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section. Judge Helen Peters removed her glasses and placed them deliberately on the polished wood of the bench. The action, small and tidy, seemed to absorb all the sound in the room. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, her eyes closed for a moment in contemplation. To the gallery, it looked like a moment of judicial reflection. To Rick O'Connell, it felt like an eternity in the electric chair. The judge wasn't just considering the facts. She was gathering the full weight of the consequences she was about to unleash. When her eyes opened, they were devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of the law itself, impersonal, unforgiving, and absolute. She looked down, not at the lawyers, but directly at Rick, pinning him with a stare that peeled away his designer suit and confident facade, leaving only the scared, two-timing bloke underneath. Mr. O'Connell, she began, her voice quiet, but with an edge of cold steel that cut through the silence. In my 20 years on this bench, I've seen a great many dissolution proceedings. I've seen acrimony, sadness, and greed. I've seen complex financial arrangements designed to hide assets, and I've seen simple ones designed to ensure fairness. But rarely, she paused, letting the word hang in the air, have I seen a case where one party has displayed such profound and willful ignorance of their own legal and personal history. Rick's throat went dry. This wasn't a ruling. This was a vivisection. You sat before this court, Judge Peters continued, and under oath in your deposition, you constructed a myth of the lone genius, the self-made titan who single-handedly forged an empire. You erased your partner, You testified that the foundational capital for your company was yours, when we have seen irrefutable evidence, a bank check endorsed by your own hand, that it came from the family of the woman you now seek to discard. That wasn't a lapse in memory, Mr. O'Connell. That was perjury. Carl Simpson winced as if he'd been struck. His client hadn't just been out-strategized. He had been exposed as a common liar. The judge continued her dissection. You then proceeded to minimize Mrs. O'Connell's contributions to mere hobbies and social duties. Yet witness after witness, from your own longtime project manager to the very people who designed your products, have testified that Isabel Duran was not an accessory to your success. She was its chief architect. She was not just a partner in your marriage. She was the founding partner of O'Connell and Duran Properties, a truth hidden in the very name you so proudly display on your buildings. A name you chose to deliberately misrepresent to the public. Rick could feel the blood pounding in his ears. He could feel Saskia's gaze at the side of his face, no longer adoring, but questioning, horrified. His mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, recalled a conversation from the year before at the country club. He had been on a high, laughing. The key to success, he had pontificated, is to never let anyone else have the real power. The details, the fine print, that's where you keep your kingdom safe. He had believed it. He had believed he was the master of the details. Judge Peters picked up the post-nuptial asset assignment agreement, holding it as if it were radioactive. Which brings us to this document, the supreme act of arrogance. Your lawyer, Mr. Simpson, argues it is unconscionable, signed under duress. But the true duress, it seems, was your own. The fear of a lawsuit. You used your wife as a legal shield. You presented it as an act of trust, a way to protect the family. You made her the receptacle for your entire fortune, confident in your power to command her to give it back at will. She put the document down and picked up the certified letter. But Mrs. O'Connell, it turns out, understood the power you had given her far better than you did. She sent you this letter, a clear, unequivocal declaration stating her understanding that the transfer was permanent, her security. It was sent via certified mail. Mr. O'Connell, its delivery is a matter of legal record. Your defense is that you were too busy, too important, to read your own mail. You delegated, you dismissed, you ignored. You treated a declaration that altered the ownership of your billion-dollar empire with the same attention you'd give a piece of junk mail. She leaned forward, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. In the law, Mr. O'Connell, silence has meaning. When presented with a clear statement of terms, your failure to challenge, object, or even reply constitutes acceptance. You had 7 years to challenge this. You had 7 years to file the joint request to reverse the transfer. You did nothing. Because in your world, Isabel Duran was not an entity with rights. She was an extension of your will. You didn't believe you needed to reverse it because you never believed the power had truly left your hands. It was the most expensive assumption of your life. The room was now so silent that the frantic scratch of the court reporter's pen sounded like a bushfire. Saskia Lane was no longer looking at Rick. She was staring at her own crimson-painted nails, the dream of a future as Mrs. O'Connell dissolving into a nightmare. The bloke she had latched onto wasn't a king. He was a gala who'd given his crown away and forgotten where he'd put it. Rick O'Connell felt a cold wave wash over him, a horrifying clarity. The courtroom walls seemed to be closing in. The smug confidence that had been his armor for decades had been peeled away, and he was bare and exposed. He looked at Isabel. Her face was serene, but her eyes held the knowledge of this day, a knowledge she had carried alone for years. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her patience for weakness. Now he saw it. It had been discipline. Therefore, Judge Peters declared, her voice rising to a formal, proclamatory pitch, this court is not here to divide the assets of O'Connell and Duran properties, as there is nothing to divide. The assets are not matrimonial property, subject to equitable distribution. She stood, a black-robed figure of ultimate authority, and delivered the final verdict, each word a nail in the coffin of Rick O'Connell's life. Based on the documents submitted and verified, this court confirms that legal and full controlling ownership of the FDP Holding Corporation and all of its subsidiary assets, the real estate properties and the financial accounts, was legally and irrevocably transferred to Mrs. Isabel Duran 7 years ago. This is not an asset split. This is a confirmation of ownership. She took one last sharp breath. The whole shebang is now hers. The silence that followed was a physical blow. Then came the sound. The bottle of bubbly, forgotten and slippery with condensation, slid from Rick's nerveless hands. It didn't smash. It hit the marble floor with a sick, dull thud, the sound of a fallen monarch. The bottle of bubbles rolled ignominiously across the floor and came to a halt near the witness stand, its promise of celebration now a mocking epitaph of. Rick opened his mouth to yell, to object, to rage against the impossible injustice of it all. But all that came out was a dry, rasping gasp. His power, his voice, his very identity had been stripped away. He was a nobody. Judge Peters banged her gavel once, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot through the tomb-like silence. "This court is adjourned." As she walked out of the room, chaos erupted. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing. Carl Simpson slumped into his chair, covering his face with his hands, his career in ashes. Saskia Lane stood, gave one last look at the empty man she'd staked her future on, a look of pure, unadulterated contempt, and walked out without a word. In the midst of the pandemonium, Eliza Jones placed a gentle hand on Isabel's arm. Isabel rose, her movements fluid and unhurried. She smoothed the front of her simple navy blue dress, a gesture of quiet finality. Her eyes met Eliza's, and she gave a small, grateful nod. Her victory wasn't in the chaos exploding around her, but in the silence she had finally won. She turned and walked towards the exit, without a backward glance at the man who was now just an accessory in a life she was leaving behind. She walked out of the courtroom, not into the arms of another man, but into the embrace of her own reclaimed future. The empire was hers. This story reminds us that true strength isn't always loud and boastful. Sometimes it's in the silent details, the patient planning, and the guts to wait for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Rick O'Connell thought he was closing a chapter, but Isabel Duran showed him he'd never even read the book. If this yarn about justice, strategy, and ultimate vindication resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story where the tables turn in the most spectacular way. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We bring you the most compelling real-life dramas and stories of poetic justice every week. Cheers, and catch you next time. Atch.